Welcome to Season 1, Episode 7 of the Table Podcast. This week, we see parallel stories of Cain and Abel show up further in Scripture. Today, we'll be in Genesis chapter 4 and Micah chapter 6, and you'll hear from Tanner Moore, Ryan Froese, Kendall Froese, and Garrison Jones. Thanks for joining us at the table.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. It's for us afternoon, so good afternoon, and hope you're staying warm out there. It's kind of cold when we got out there today, and we're going to try, as we're here together this time, we're going to try to wrap up the Cain and Abel series. We've got a couple episodes to record this afternoon, and so, if you're listening, this is not the last episode, but for us at the table, that we're going to get into the last of this series today, and try to really connect it all the way through the story of the Bible and talk about Jesus finally, right? As well. But I wanted to just give us a kind of a recap of where we've been and what we've talked about. We're 6 episodes in now, and so if you're just joining us, if you're just jumping in, it'd be cool to go back and check out those 6. But if you don't have 6 hours on hand and you want the edited version, here it is. So we started off Genesis chapter 4 with a really famous story of, 2 brothers, Cain, the older brother, and Abel. They both bring a sacrifice, and Abel's sacrifice is acceptable, or God looks on Abel with favor. But Cain, God does not look on with favor. And so kind of, the word we used is Cain is pouting about it, right? Mm-hmm. Cain's not happy that his little brother has found the favor of God. But rather than God sympathize with Cain in his pouting, God tells Cain, hey, you have a responsibility here. The reason your sacrifice wasn't accepted is because your sacrifice wasn't good. And it doesn't tell us why, right? And we've talked a lot about that in the story, that the reason that the story doesn't tell us why Cain's sacrifice is not accepted is because it's not for us to judge Cain's sacrifice either. That's Cain's responsibility. And again, the story's calling us to reflect on our own sacrifice. Right. What do we bring? What do we have to offer? Not just to God, but indirectly, when we offer something to our brother, to our sister, to our neighbor, we're offering to God a sacrifice. Because again, how can you love God and not love your neighbor, right? And that's all through the scriptures. And so Cain has a responsibility to bring a good sacrifice. But if he doesn't, sin crouches at his door. And what we see is that Cain does not master the sin, and so he kills his brother, kills his younger brother. We talked about how whenever we choose to do what's not good, it's like it births consequences into the world. Those evil physical consequences, and we allow creation to break a little bit. It's like it unravels a little bit. Yeah. And the piece that God weaved into creation starts to disintegrate just a little bit when we make those choices. And why should we not sin? Why should we master sin? Because everybody else's well-being depends on my choices. And it's not just about me, it's about all of us. And that's been a big part of our story. And we, forwarded that story on into the story of Hannah, and how Hannah has a rival, almost like a sibling rivalry with Peninnah. And we talked about how Hannah does the right thing. Rather than pour out her rival's blood, she pours out her own soul to God. And that sets the stage within the book of 1 Samuel for the 2 kings who show up, almost as if you have a firstborn older brother and a secondborn, right? King Saul, the older brother, and King David. And Saul has these sacrifices gone wrong, right? And if you remember, the reason Saul's sacrifices were bad is because Saul wants God to owe him one. So Saul thinks, if I give God this sacrifice, God owes me a victory in this battle. Right? Saul is not giving out of gratitude, and he's not giving, I think the phrase we used is, his sacrifice is not an extension of his soul.
Right.
Saul's sacrifice is if I play this card right, then maybe I can force God's hand into doing what I want God to do. And Saul just can't figure out why he keeps getting in trouble. And we talked about how maybe that's partly Cain's problem, right? And we speculated on that for a little bit. And then we see David, who has the opportunity finally to rise up and take justice into his own hands. Saul has been pursuing him to kill him for all of these years. And David finally has Saul trapped in a cave in the wilderness. And for the first time in all of these Cain and Abel stories, the little brother has the knife. It's kind of a scary thought if you're a big brother.
Yeah, brother's knife, not good.
You hand the knife to the little brother, and finally David has the opportunity to rise up. And really, I want to focus in on that part of our story today. Back in the Genesis part, back into Genesis 4, a part of the story that we haven't explored yet, and then see how that part in the story is fleshed out moving forward. And I think that, to me, this is the best part of the story. And I think this is the part for us where our faith comes from, our faith in Jesus comes from as well. And so I want to go back into Genesis 4 one more time, and I just want to read the last couple of verses here of the story that we read together the first day. And then I got a couple questions, hopefully, to get us started, and we'll see where it takes us from there. Sound good?
Cool.
Awesome. So Genesis chapter 4, and Ryan, would you read for us in Genesis 4, verses 10 through 12? So this is God's response to Cain after Cain has killed his brother. Okay, God's response. Genesis chapter 4, verses 10 through 12.
Can't find it. Genesis, hard book to find.
Yeah.
It's the first one.
10 through 12?
10 to 12, yep.
All right. The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth."
All right. God's response to Cain. What about this? What about these three verses? Anything stand out to you? I'm curious, just before we get into it, what here stands out to you?
I just said your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground is a strong statement,
Yeah.
I feel like.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely. What else? Anything else? What stands out to you here?
I think it's interesting, and it may just be I don't know what contextual thing, but it says that the ground opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand.
Yeah.
Like, that's a very specific, that it wasn't just blood that was spilled, it was blood that was spilled from your hands, specifically from your hand.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just think that's very specific that God is telling him that.
What's Cain's job?
He's his brother's keeper.
Well, he is, but what's his career?
Oh, he's a farmer.
He's a farmer.
Works the land.
Yeah, he plants things in the ground a lot, doesn't he? Yeah. And what has he sowed this time into the ground?
Death.
Yeah. He sowed innocent blood into the ground. Let's talk about that for a second. Here's what stands out to me. God tells Cain, the first command that God gives Cain right here, it's one word. What is it?
Listen.
Listen. Well, what is Cain supposed to hear? What's he supposed to listen to?
I mean, the next statement is, listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me. So it's almost like, listen for your brother's voice. You killed him.
Yeah.
Who's standing up for your brother now?
Yeah. Great. What do you think Abel's blood is saying? What is it that Cain is supposed to hear? Yeah, he's supposed to hear Abel's blood. What What would Abel's blood be saying? I know this is a little bit of a strange question and maybe something we haven't thought about before, but I think this is really important to the story.
Well, I'm just going to run with a rabbit here. Blood comes from sacrifice, so there could be a sacrificial aspect of it, and potentially.
Okay. Yeah, what else? Let's keep going. What is Abel's blood saying? Or what is it crying out for?
Justice could be.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
You got me at a loss here.
Well, good. All right. I like that word, justice. I think this is important as well. So Cain kills Abel, and Cain doesn't invite God back, right? God just shows up. And what is it that draws God back to the brothers? He tells Cain right here. What is it that draws God back?
Abel's blood.
It's Abel's blood that brings God back. And why would that draw God back to this situation?
Because an injustice has been done.
Yeah, there's injustice. And so God is responding. Now I think this is also important to consider as well. When God responds, does he respond out of desire to punish the guilt or punish the guilty? Is it Cain's guilt that has drawn God back to these brothers, or is it Abel's innocence that God is coming to defend? Which one does God seem to suggest is his reason for responding?
But what he says, he's responding not because of Cain's guilt, but because of Abel's innocence and the injustice that's happened.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that God being our, Abel's provider needs to come and, help him, even though it's not, he's dead, but to make right what was wrong.
Okay.
It's almost like God is Abel's true keeper, in a sense, because Cain didn't do his job.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. Humans are part of this family of God in which God is the father, right? And ultimately God is the head of the family. And so God responds not out of desire to punish Cain. I think this is really important. God responds in defense of Abel, who has been abused, wrongly treated. Right? God responds in defense of those who have had the injustice committed against them. And so when we use that word justice, and Abel's blood is crying out for justice, I think there's two ways to think about it. I think we could, on one hand, talk about justice as being punishment for the guilty. And on the other hand, we could talk about justice as being defense of the innocent, right? And one is like, you have this punitive justice, but you also have this proactive, that seeks good type of justice. And I think that's the justice that Abel cries out, that Abel's blood cries out for, and the motive for God to respond to this situation. So Abel's blood God says it's crying out to him. But here's the next thing is, and Ryan, you already pointed it out, but where does the blood go? It's kind of a metaphor here, but where does the blood go right there in verse 11? What does God say about the blood?
I mean, into the ground, but he says that the blood, or the ground opened its mouth to receive the blood.
Yeah.
Which I also find interesting.
Yeah, again, kind of like this, like personification of the ground, like having to drink the blood of Abel, right? Like almost like you get the idea of Cain pouring the blood of Abel down the throat of the soil. But here's here's the next part about that. So what happens now to the ground as a result of Cain's choice?
So there's an interesting dichotomy here because the ground produced life for Cain beforehand, right? He'd plant seeds, produce life, and now all of a sudden the ground's having to swallow up death, which is kind of an interesting switch from what it is used to producing.
That's right. And then what does God say about the ground?
It will no longer yield crops for Cain.
Yeah. Yeah, because Cain has planted death
Right.
in the ground. Now what's going to happen to the ground?
It's going to die. Can't produce life.
It won't produce life for Cain. And now this is kind of along the lines of some things we've already talked about, right? That our choices birth consequences that are related to our choices. But I really want to focus in on that thought for a second of like Cain almost planting, like he's sowing death into the ground. And this the idea of almost like the blood is being soaked into the ground. You ever gotten blood on something before? You know, working and you cut your finger or something, and what happens to the shirt or whatever it is that you're wearing? You get blood on it.
Stains badly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So
It's usually very hard to get off.
yeah, what do you do with a T-shirt that has been stained because it got covered in blood?
Typically, you get rid of it
How come?
because it's almost impossible to
Kendall,
get
it
out.
looked like Kendall had something to say.
Or you put peroxide on it and it
Yeah.
blocks it out.
If you really like the shirt, you try to save it, but it's a hard cause.
Absolutely. So, like, there is a way to
Right.
remove the stain of blood, but it's really hard, and sometimes it's better off to just throw it out.
That is interesting.
And what's interesting about it?
I don't know. It just makes me think about the specifics of Jesus' blood touching the earth.
Okay.
Like, not just in a metaphorical sense,
Yeah.
but in a physical sense.
Okay.
It's the first thing I thought about because the earth, for the first time here, it's swallowed up blood unjustly.
Yeah.
And the justice, like the true justice, is, fulfilled, I guess, whenever Jesus dies. But he could have died without his blood spilling to the ground, I guess.
Yeah. Sure.
But that is a specific thing that it talks about in the New Testament.
Okay. We'll get there. We're going to get there.
Okay.
Definitely. But let's also talk about this as well in verse 11 of Genesis chapter 4. God tells Cain, what does he say right there before he says he's driven from the ground, which opened his mouth? What does God tell Cain?
Under a curse.
So, do you remember the first thing God says to humans? Genesis chapter 1, and God blessed them, and he gave them the blessing of life, right? And now, because Cain has taken life, what's happened?
He's under a curse.
Now he's got the opposite going on. Now, all of a sudden, he's under a curse. But it's not just Cain, it seems like, that's been cursed. What else? What is the biggest part of Cain's curse here? Like, what's the punishment?
It's not going to produce. I mean, his crops would bring in income for
Right.
his family,
Yeah,
for
sure.
people, and now it's not going to be as fruitful.
What is it that won't be as fruitful?
Like the provision from the ground
Yeah,
is
yeah,
not
yeah.
going to be as good as it was.
Right.
Absolutely. So a livelihood.
Yeah.
And that affects the people he sells his crop to
Yeah.
because it won't be as much.
It's kind of like Cain has actually stained the ground with innocent blood. And because Cain has stained the earth with the blood, now that which has taken on the blood has been cursed by this act of evil. Does that make sense?
And
Yeah, go ahead.
And I just thought the earth being alive, like it didn't ask for that, like it,
Right.
its purpose was to produce, and so now
That's right. The purpose of earth was to produce life. And it's what God made it for, what God made the ground for. And it was forced to drink the blood of Abel, which is now brought it under a curse as well. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to produce food the way that for Cain, the way that it was going to. Mm-hmm. You think this is enough justice? You think it's a fair trade?
Not for me to decide, thank goodness.
Okay. Yeah,
we can discuss it, but
yeah, let's discuss it. Yeah, I'm not letting you off the hook that easy.
Well, the next verse, Cain says that his punishment is greater than he can bear. Mm-hmm. So now it's almost like.
But why? Keep going. Why is it too much for him to bear?
You have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden.
Keep going.
I shall be a fugitive and wander on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me.
There you go. So why is Cain worried about his punishment?
Well, I think he didn't think about the consequence. Like, he, in a moment of anger, did something, and it's like, I should have thought about, I should have thought about that, because now this is going to be for the rest of my life. Like, it's just going to be, like, punishment for me. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And what does Cain see as the end result? He's taken Abel's life, and so
someone will take mine.
Someone will take mine. So Cain sees pretty quickly, like Cain knows what the fair trade-off is here, right? And what should the trade be?
Death.
Cain has taken an innocent life, so what does Cain owe?
His life.
He owes his life. And here's the hard part, maybe the hard question, is God really gonna let Cain off the hook? It's like it doesn't take long to figure out what the trade should be here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even Cain knows it.
Even Cain knows. Yep.
Cain knows it pretty, like right off the bat. Cain knows what the trade is. So is that just something God couldn't figure out?
It's interesting. He actually protects him from getting killed.
He does. Wait a minute. I thought God was supposed to be here to defend Abel.
I don't know that this is where we're headed, but it almost seems purposeful in that by doing that, he's almost allowing the earth to be filled with more evil. It seems like it's almost, to me, it's almost like, well, I'm going to leave you to your own devices and let you screw this up because you refuse to conquer sin. Yeah. You refused to, basically, you allowed sin into your life, and now I'm going to let you deal with the consequences of what you've done. Mm-hmm. Almost as a way to show people what happens whenever you allow sin to take over your life. I don't know.
That feels pretty bleak.
Absolutely.
I think we also got a glimpse of the character of God. When Adam and Eve first sinned back in the garden, what did God do still? He clothed them, right? Cain kills Abel, and God is obviously not happy. He's here to fight for the injustice, but also get a glimpse of grace toward Cain as well. Mm-hmm. Kind of pointing forward to Jesus in a sense too there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of cries for Jesus in this story.
Yeah.
And cries that we're going to explore and get to as we move forward. But I kind of want to just dive into that uncomfortable feeling that I think you were alluding to, Ryan, of it kind of feels like God is letting Cain go. Let's fast forward that. What's the future look like? You've just let the one who spilled blood on the ground and cursed the ground go. We could assume what's Cain going to do more of?
More sin, more, like he's going to birth evil.
He's going to create more and birth more bad consequences into the world. And this is just one person.
Yeah.
What about Cain is afraid of all the other people out there too. And he thinks they'll kill him, which means Cain knows what about those people?
I find it super interesting. Sorry, this is just a thought that came into my head because if you go to the Exodus, after the Exodus, and God comes up with all these rules, you know, some of them are super strict.
Mm-hmm.
Basically an eye for an eye.
Mm-hmm.
Basically a life for a life.
Mm-hmm.
Why does he do that then but not here?
Hmm.
Because, and to me, the whole reasoning for a lot of the rules in Exodus were always, well, if you allow it to happen
Mm-hmm.
without punishing it, then it's going to just continue and get worse and more people are going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But this almost seems like he's not dealing with it.
Hmm.
Like that he's purposefully allowing him to let sin to let sin take over his life.
Hmm.
That's what it almost feels like.
And this is just one person.
Mm-hmm.
Is Cain the only sinner out there?
Obviously not.
I mean, let's just look at humanity today. You know, look at your own life. Is it fair to say that there's probably only one sinner?
No.
So, what if this is happening with all the humans? Then what? What's going to happen to the creation? What's going to happen to the ground? What's going to happen to the earth? What's going to happen to the human family?
Exactly what happened till Noah.
And what is that? And then after Noah as well, right?
Yeah.
What is that?
Further and further decay and moving away from what God had intended for humans to be doing.
More chaos.
More chaos.
Instead of heaven and earth going back together, it's unraveling.
Yeah. Yeah. And think about that one blood stain on your t-shirt. It's like the ground has been stained in one spot from Cain killing his brother Abel. But now let's extrapolate that out into all of humanity. And what's happening to the ground across creation as humans are violent with each other and as humans are...
There's more stains.
Yeah, it's
More
like...
blood getting spilled.
Yeah. There's... Creation itself is being, in our own lives, right, are being stained by evil. And it's like this innocent blood is well, to use the language of Genesis, it cries out to God for a response. So if we fast forward the story here, and let's just land and touch back on the story of David and Saul for a moment. And I know we talked about that a lot the last time we were together, but from this angle of justice, all of a sudden now David has the knife in his hands, and he gets the chance to take the life of the guilty. The innocent finally has the knife and gets the opportunity to take the life of the guilty. But David doesn't do it, right? Why not? And let's examine that story just momentarily from this perspective now and say, what is David avoiding? What's he trying to avoid maybe by letting Saul go? And does David maybe do the thing that God did with Cain in that story?
Yeah, I think we talked about a little bit that David chose the path of righteousness. It was almost a test. Like, here's your chance, David.
Yeah.
Do you want to fall on the same path as Saul, or do you want to carve out a better path,
Mm-hmm.
kind of deal?
Mm-hmm.
So he chose a different road than Cain, than Saul did.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anything else here?
The one perspective I have, though, is like he knows that Saul's going to have to die for him to become king.
Yeah.
Because Saul's not going to stop being king until he dies.
Yeah.
Well, he knows he's going to be king.
David.
He's been anointed.
Okay. Yep.
And he knows he's going to be king. So you could almost sit there and think, well, here's, like, God put this in front of you.
Yeah.
This is where you become king. But I think, just to kind of talk about what we did last time, David didn't want to take that into his own hands.
Yeah.
he wanted God to handle that for him instead of him taking it into his own hands.
Yeah.
And to me, that, I don't know, I guess that's the heart of it. Because he was like, well, I know I'm going to be king, and I trust that God is going to make me king, but I'm not going to do it myself. I'm not going to find a way to get there myself. Because that's exactly what Saul is doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what he's doing. I'm going to, win these battles so that I can get glory. And I'm going to do it with my own hands. I'm going to make sacrifices, but really it's just because I want God to help me win the battle. And so everything is, I'm going to take things in my own hands. And David is like, I'm going to let God handle it instead of doing it myself.
I think there's a similar idea in Noah's Ark, because who closed the door to the ark? Not Noah.
Yeah.
God did. You're like, why is that the case? I think it's a similar idea. Noah didn't have to say, haha, God, no, I'm not letting y'all in. God closed the door for him. He took it into his hands rather than Noah saying, I have to be the one to shut your body out. I think it's a similar type thing there. God took that off of Noah, So,
Kendall, you had something you wanted to add on to that.
Well, I was just going to say that taking matters into your own hand would be more of like the sinful flesh, like, I want what I want. But when you allow, it's what God told Cain, like, if you do what is right, won't you be accepted?
Yeah.
And so we don't have to take it into our own hand of like revenge or,
Sure.
because then we're not doing what is right.
Yeah.
And allowing God to be the ultimate judge and just.
Yeah. And again, David, rather than trying to punish the guilty, appeals to God to defend himself, the innocent, and trusts that that's what God. It's like David understands the purpose of these stories, right? Like David knows that God is motivated to defend the innocent, and so rather than seek, and it's not to say that there's not punishment for Cain or that there's not punishment for the guilty, right? It's not to say that doesn't exist, but that's not God's motive.
Right.
That's not his ultimate goal, right? And so David knows that, and he appeals to God's grace in order to defend himself, the innocent one, just like God is doing here with Abel. This is important that we get to this because, and I hope you can already start to see some of the connections we can make to the life and death of Jesus through this. But there's one more place I really want to touch on in the Old Testament before we do. And it is a really cool couple of verses from the book of Micah. And it's Micah chapter 6. And as you're turning over there and finding that passage, just a little bit of, I don't know if it's maybe backstory or maybe some questions to help set us up here would be a little bit better. So we fast forward now into the book of Micah, and we're at least 1,000 years in here to this experiment called Israel, right? And maybe experiment is a bad term, but this plan that God has to help to redeem the nations, called the nation of Israel. And Micah in chapter 6 of his prophecy is wrestling with this idea of Micah himself feeling, I think, a kind of like Cain. And so let's pause there for a moment and make this a little bit personal. So we all like to imagine ourselves as Abel, the righteous one. I think it's, we all like to imagine ourselves and think about the times when maybe we've been the victim of injustice and that we want God to defend us, and we all want to be David and we never want to be Saul. But in this part of the story, I think that Micah is wrestling with, what about the times when I am Cain or I am Saul? I wonder, have you guys ever been Cain or Saul from this story in your life? What was that look for? Well, we've got a husband and wife over here, so that might be a bad question asked today.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, obviously, you hope as you get older and a little wiser that you're Cain a little bit less. But gosh,
yeah,
It's me all the time.
Yeah.
I think the further removed you are from like doing what God wants, it's easier to become a Cain or a Saul.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're focused on doing what he says,
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit easier, but not. I mean, you still will sin.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so much easier too to see ourselves as Abel and just ignore when we're Cain.
Yeah.
You know, like we want to bring attention when we're Abel, but we don't even recognize sometimes when we're acting like Cain.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking earlier, once at a basketball game last night, and one of the coaches complained about every single call. But whenever the call went for him, he never said a word, even if it was bad. You know, so it's that same thing. We recognize when it goes against us. We don't always recognize when we're the ones that are pushing down on somebody or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, it's way more easy to recognize when we're Abel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we hone in whenever other people are doing things wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very easy to do
It's easy to
that.
point out.
Especially nowadays with video and
Yeah.
Yeah.
you can, gosh, it's so easy. I mean, it's so funny too. You know, I've been a baseball person. I played baseball
Yeah.
and watched a lot of baseball when I was growing up. And nowadays, if you ever watch a game or whatever, they have like the umpire statistics,
Mm-hmm.
like how many calls he's missed,
Yeah.
and whatever. Like, it's
Yeah.
crazy that they have statistics on that.
Yeah.
But it's just in our society, more and more seems like they're really good at picking out. You screwed this up this one time,
Yeah.
and we've always done it.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not as evident.
Yeah.
Now it's very easy to see how you've screwed up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we've gotten worse and worse about giving people grace for stuff like that
Mm.
because we want things to be perfect.
Yeah.
We want things to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all long for justice
Yeah.
and for that peace, or to use the Hebrew term, that shalom that God made us for, right? And we do. We long for it. We yearn for it. Cain is devastated when God tells him, because you stained the ground is now cursed. And how long is Cain's curse for?
Forever.
For the rest of his life. Can Cain, here we go, can Cain scrub away the stain that he has stained the ground with?
Didn't make peroxide yet, so I guess not.
Yeah, the peroxide didn't exist. That t-shirt's going in the trash, right? that stain, and that's one time, that's one mistake, one sin. It's a big one, but it's one. You think about over a lifetime, how much stain have I produced just in my own life through my own bad choices? And if one of Cain's sins can't be scrubbed away, then what is there for me?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think about that a lot as a parent. Because I think a lot of kids do this when they're growing up. They tell themselves, I'm never going to be like my parents.
Well,
And
that's
I'm not.
true. My mom and dad listen to this, and I'm just totally not like them. I'm joking. I'm joking. I love my mom and dad.
Yeah. But I think about all of these different situations. I think about stuff that I had within me that I didn't know was there until I became a dad. And for us, when we first,
My
obviously
toes are starting to hurt a little bit right now.
our path to parenthood has been a little different than most people's.
Right.
Especially in that we were parents for a year and then we were not again. And that was different. And I remember during that time, at one point telling Kendall, this is better to not be a parent. Because all of the sinful things that are in my heart, I'm not having to deal with right now anymore. Like as a dad. But that was always there. Having kids in our home is what brought it out. And so it was super interesting because I remember telling Kendall at one point, like, this is easier. It's easier to not be a parent because I don't have to deal with all of this dirty, whatever that is that's deep inside that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
And so now as a dad, I'm having to like work through that.
Yeah.
And most of it is stuff from whenever I was a kid because of how I was raised. And I have good parents.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I have good parents. But there's still so many things that I know my parents did that were wrong
Yeah.
that birthed
Because they're humans.
Yeah, like one of it is like being angry.
Yeah.
I have a problem with being angry with my kids and being too hard on them, because that's how my parents were on me. You know what I mean? And one of the things I've told Kendall too is I'd rather be too hard on my kids than not enough, because I've seen the alternative.
Sure.
But there's still things within me, like anger wise, that I don't like to see. But it comes out because I'm a parent. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys have thoughts there, or any more you want to add on to that? Or?
No, I agree. I think going back to kind of your question, I think too, kind of along those same lines, it's so easier for me to point out, Ryan, you struggle with this. But then the instant somebody tells us something, what's our first response typically?
Justify it.
We get defensive.
Yeah.
We get defensive, right?
Yeah.
And I can imagine Cain, yeah, but you didn't take my sacrifice. Yeah, but that's not fair. Yeah, but when really we can humble ourselves and recognize, man, I need to work on whatever this aspect of my life, you know. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind for us as we examine our own lives from this, you know.
So what started this whole process with Cain and Abel? I mean, what's the beginning of the story that causes all of this episode to take place? Where are they going, the two brothers?
To give a sacrifice.
A sacrifice. And so...
Which we still don't know why they were doing that.
Which we can... Yeah, we maybe need just an episode at the end of this where we do like a... Because there have been some questions from people in the church about that. That would take us, in my opinion, at least an episode to answer.
Yeah, some Q&A.
Yeah, that'd be kind of fun to do that. So if you are listening and you see one of us around, holler at us,
Yeah.
shoot us a question.
And we have an email we'll send out. If you have a question, you can send to that email. Then
Oh,
we can
yeah,
have an
yeah.
episode of Q&As.
Oh, that would be cool.
We'll send that out.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah.
good.
Okay, so where we can answer that question of why are they sacrificing? The book of Leviticus hasn't been written yet, but the book of Leviticus does get written, and the purpose of the sacrifices that God gives is to help wash away some of the stains that people create.
So
Right?
it's the peroxide.
The blood of the lamb is like a peroxide for sin. Or maybe not for sin, but for the consequences of
For the
sin.
for the stain of the sin.
For the stain of the sin, right? But it's an imperfect cleaning agent. Because, and here's where Micah comes in. Micah, I think, is wrestling with his own sin. And he's asking the question, what sacrifice could I bring that would actually wash this stuff off? Like, what could actually make this curse go away? What could I give to God that would clean this up? And so, let's read this. Micah chapter 6. Kendall, would you read that for us? Verses 6 through, let's just do verses 6 and 7. Just his questions.
Okay.
Sorry.
With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, none of it will be enough. Like, no amount.
You get the feeling, right?
Yeah.
And that's what Micah is wrestling with.
And I think he realizes none of it is enough. Because he knows it's not possible to give 10,000 rivers of olive oil.
Yeah.
So it's like, he knows. Even though he's asking, he knows, like,
Yeah.
there's nothing I can give you that's enough.
Like, what can I do
So
to
what do I
please
do?
you? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not even like what could I do to please you? Because God is pleased with his children, right? God rejoices over his people. God rejoices over Israel. But there's this yearning inside of Micah that says, yeah, but God, look at my life. It's still the product of all of these consequences of bad choices that I have made. And is it possible in any way to clean this stuff off? What could I give God that would erase this? Is there anything strong enough? And Micah asked this question. Here you go, crazy. The last question. Could even my firstborn son clean off the stains that I have made in this life? What do you think about that?
He's wrestling. You talk about sacrificing a kid. He's wrestling big time.
Yeah.
But that also kind of sounds like Jesus, doesn't it?
He's kind of foreshadowing a little bit too, though, isn't he? That maybe it will take a firstborn son. Maybe the firstborn son introduces death, and maybe the death of the true firstborn son will lead us back to life. Yeah, but that's for the next episode. So let's not get into that just too quickly here. But I wonder if I know this episode is a little more bleak, isn't it? What we're talking about. This is more of a tough, this is not a good happy feeling episode.
Yeah.
But this is a place, I think, where many people who've tried to follow God, at some point you get to, where you go, could anything wash this away? Have you ever been there before?
Recognize your wretchedness and say, how could God ever love me, or how could God ever use me or save me or anything like that? I think I've been to that point for sure.
Yeah. And so what are the things that Micah is going to offer?
A lot of the things that he's talking about are things that are in Leviticus.
It's right. So a burnt offering, that's the going up offering, the ascension offering. That's kind of like the staple offering of Leviticus, right? That's the one that gets offered every morning and every evening in Micah's day at the temple. And it's probably the most central offering to the Levitical system, right? It's the one, the whole animal gets burnt up at the altar and it goes up in smoke to God. And the idea is that I'm offering myself like this lamb. As the lamb is consumed, so I will be consumed. And the only way into heaven is to be transformed into something new. But even Micah is saying, as good as that is, I still go home every day, the same Micah. I burn that lamb on the altar, and I still go home. I still go home as a human every day, right? What else? What else does he ask for?
Thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil.
Yeah. What if we just multiply it? So
More sacrifice.
Yeah. More, bigger. If I give all the animals in the world, what would that get me? About my own child, my firstborn, for my transgression, the fruit of my body, for the sin of my soul. Boy, like you said, you see Micah wrestling here with this question, and he answers. Here's what God requires from you, and he gives us a very simple way to live. But I think that, Ryan, you nailed it when you said, but it seems like Micah knows that there isn't an answer to his first question. Or at least the answer to his first question is no. None of these things will clean it up. And so what does God require of people? Garrison, go ahead and read that for us, verse 8 right there.
He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
And how does that call right there maybe give a little bit of maybe lift a little bit of a burden of what we've been talking about so far today? Or maybe do you feel that kind of lifting a little burden?
Yeah, it's just kind of like in spite of all of that, it's about your heart and where your heart lies. To act justly and do everything you can to be just and to love mercy, and then to walk humbly with God and realize that you are a sinner, that you are, you've screwed up, but that doesn't mean that you can't walk with God anymore. You can still walk with him.
That's right.
And walk with him the best that you can. And I don't think everybody's best or whatever is the same. I think that's where people get hung up on the I'm too bad to be able to join this community because I've done too much. Well, everyone's walking humbly with God is not the same. But I think there's just a you do what you can do and do the best that you can do. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what Abel was doing.
That's right.
Well, this kind of takes us back to Saul, right? Because he tries to sacrifice, and God says, I want your obedience, not your sacrifice. That's exactly what this is saying, right? I want you to obey what I'm saying. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly. Your sacrifices aren't doing it here. I want your obedience. It takes us right back to Saul and the conversation he had.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And what a humbling question for Micah to ask at first is any of this stuff enough? Could I ever come to God with enough to make him wash this away? Could I ever move God to the point where he would respond in a way that would clean off all of these stains? And Micah's kind of he doesn't answer, but his it's a rhetorical question, right? I guess the rhetorical answer, which doesn't exist, but is the answer is no. There is nothing I could give, and so what is it then that I can do? I can walk in humility because I'm humbled by the fact that God would still walk with me, even though I could never move him to the point where he would wash away the stains that I have created in my life.
Absolutely.
Right. But wait, spoiler alert, there's good news. Because we've gotten to this part in the story and we're still waiting for that response of God. It's like Abel's blood cried out at the very beginning, and we started our episode by saying, did God really even respond? And isn't God kind of letting Cain off the hook? And is that really justice? And I mean, we're asking these questions, and then we pose those questions to ourselves, and we say, well, maybe we don't want God to be just, because maybe he'd start with me if he was going to be just and clean the world up. Maybe I'd be the first one to go. And so maybe I don't want God to actually come and defend the innocent. But boy, we're humbled by this and we're confused by this, but there is a response. And I think Micah alludes to it here with his question of, should I offer my firstborn? And I think, just to close us out, the thought is that no, Micah, your firstborn will not move the heart of God, but God's will. But God's will. And as we pick up the next time, that's what we're gonna move into the gospel and see how that plays itself out in the life of Jesus.
It's good.
Cool.
Thanks for listening to FBC Seminoles, The Table Podcast. A new episode will be released each Monday. We invite you to pull up a chair and join our table each week as we dig into God's Word together. We would love for you to join one of our Connect groups that meets throughout the week and worship with us on Sunday mornings at 9 or 10:30. If you'd like more information, you can call our church office at 432-758-3291 or visit our website at fbcseminole.org.